Hello. Let me just check a few things. So on our third video, I'm not sure how long we're into our study, but probably about an hour and a half. So I hope you realise in our journey of getting deeper, and particularly in this instance, in this context, getting deeper into this, that we barely scratched the surface, but we're getting so much out of it that we saw before. And this is the point. And the point of this whole thing is to facilitate. So we're up on our judgment of Tamar, and it's not aligned with how God judges her. And in fact, we just think we don't understand the judgment, so we keep reading the storyline and getting to the same place. So something's got to change. So what's that great quote by Einstein? About wanting to change something but doing everything the same way. So we read it. Why if we read it would we think we've understand the judgment if we don't already understand the judgment? We've got to contextually understand something more. Something's got to change basically. And that's our mindset. So we basically need a paradigm shift. So that's where we got to. So this at the end is quite short and sweet, but is very important. So the whole point of the seed process in context of the family, and again what we talked about is the spiritual context as well as a physical context. So this is the physical context. She's in a family, obligations, she has to marry these men, provide her heir. That's what she's doing, that's what she's trying to do. But this is the result. So in the seed process we'd call that fruit. So what's the fruit of this whole obligation process in this context is giving birth to the heir, and that heir obviously is again important for several reasons. One, because it continues the line of Judah. So the purpose culturally of family is continued. So the family's done its role. All the people in the family have done their roles and fulfilled them properly. And that they continue there, and spiritually speaking, that the line of Jesus is continued from where God intended it to be. Now, again, what Tamar did, it's not that it's not wrong, it's just that she fulfilled her obligations and lived a purposeful life to fulfill her obligations. So she broke a lower law and fulfilled a higher law, and actually the men in the story didn't do either, they broke both. So that's kind of the context and the meaning. What's the best thing that could happen in this storyline? I mean, we probably can't answer it before we began this study. But one or two things should have happened, not just could have. So Judah keeps giving Tamar his sons because that's his role. His specific role in the story is to do that. That's his obligation. And his obligation of the brothers in the story is the same obligation, but in a different way. They're supposed to provide the seed, and if there's no seed, there's no fruit. Yeah, and that's part of the process. So something starts as a process, and we talked about journeys. So it's another journey. We see a massive anything, a tree, a person, a blade of grass, and it's not necessarily massive, but what I mean is it's fully grown. Well, where did that start? It's a seed. Everything begins with a seed. So there's a process, and as we said, within that, what I call the creational mandate is that reproduces after itself and creates the same thing. And it's the same with humans, because it's one process. And these things work spiritually as well as physically and actually mentally as well. You've got an idea. It's a seed. It's a thought in your brain. That thought will die unless you act on it. Unless it is watered and it has some sun. See, that these same things apply. So that's kind of where we've got to with the storyline. And again, the end process is fruit, and the fruit in this context is that she gives birth. So the point is, she not only gives birth, and again, it's a roundabout way, but she's continuing a line. She's done her job, so to speak. Her obligations are met to the family. The purpose of the family is now fulfilled. So you can look at this several ways. It's not so black and white. As I said, they both, Tamar and all the men in the story both sinned. The storyline's not saying she didn't. It's not commenting because we know she did. We don't need the storyline to tell us she was a naughty girl. That's obvious. And again, we miss the obviousness culturally of what the men should be doing. But that's the same. So she gives birth to twins. So this is the principle of giving birth to something. And again, it's the same thing. So this is a practical story. This is practically explaining what happens. Spiritually, things work the same. So again, we go back to the point of the church. You would say, well, if we identify the roles, spiritually speaking, in a church context or a kingdom context, it's the leaders in the church and how they relate to women. And how they relate to, it's not just women actually, everyone in the church is not a leader. What I would call a follower. And a whole context of what I call followership versus leadership. And they both have different obligations and different roles. So one's supposed to lead and one's supposed to follow. So that's basically the principle here. It's not so black and white as that, but fundamentally that's what's supposed to happen. The problem is you get people who are in roles in the kingdom and in church who are both followers and leaders. So they have both obligations. So the relationships work differently depending on the relationship. But leaders are obligated to lead, look after, to pastor the followers. It's the same thing. So how do you reproduce? How does the spirit reproduce life? Well, the same way. So this is the principle. This is why this is really important. So whatever's going on in your life, particularly, it doesn't particularly apply when you've got bad circumstances or when you see circumstances that are against the purpose and the fulfillment of that purpose in your own life, which is to reproduce. So we see what happens. So the midwife tells the story for us. So one of the twins, as it's popping out of Tamar's room, puts his hand out. So the midwife took a scarlet thread and tied it on his wrist and said, this one came first. This is the first time we're actually probably just needing to start by quoting verse by verse, word from word. Verse 21, but when he drew back his hand, I've repeated that there, his brother came out and she said, so this is how you have broken out, and he was named Perez. So I've got footnotes there, take note of the footnotes, because these are what these names mean. We start off with names, and actually we come back to the point, these names are really, really important. So much so that they're put in the footnotes. So really, if we want to understand anything in the Bible where names are mentioned, we need a footnote for each of the names, not just the ones we think are important. Actually, some of them are more important than not, actually. Here, we can kind of get why they're important, but there's no footnotes for the others, which is a shame. So we can't actually decipher how important they are to the context of the storyline. So Tamar is, Judah isn't, Onan is, and that's kind of why we covered them in previous videos. Anyway, so she said, this is how you've broken out, and he was named Perez, and his brother, who has a scarlet from his wrist, came out, and he was named Zerah. Now, the interesting thing about the Shem principle is when you actually, because again we've said that Shem is the character, it's the purpose of the person, what he's supposed to be doing. So there's a whole thing about, in kind of Hebraic thinking, about a person being what they breathe out, their breath, their spirit. The breath, their spirit, their character, their nature. It's who they are. Actually, this is totally off the point. But we tend to over-sexualise everything where we see some sexual connotations, which is actually disinforms us of the meaning of what the Bible is trying to tell us and what it's trying to give meaning to. And this is a good example. And it's the reason we don't understand this idea of Jesus being beautiful, despite the fact Jesus doesn't say he is. Obviously, because he's God, he doesn't say he isn't, but the Bible says he's beautiful. Anyway, getting back to the point. So if we translate these names into their meaning, and so this is how he broken out, and he was named Breaking Out. This one comes out first, but when he drew back his hand, his brother came out, and he was named Scarlet, which means salvation, literally. We'll look at that a bit more depth when we look at the names and the meaning of names. But basically, skipping to the end result means it's related to red and to blood and ultimately to salvation, and you can guess why. So, salvation or brightness, same thing. So, in our own processes, in the processes that we are created for, where we are meeting friction with whatever we're meeting friction with, so it can be the world, the devil, the church, people outside the church, particular people, which are holding us back from meeting our purpose. And the whole deeper meaning in the story is this is the story. This is the storyline of Tamar. Is we need salvation at the end of that process, which is fruit, which is we need to give birth to something. So we talked about a metaphor in that, spiritually speaking, which is to do with unpacking the language of Hebrew. That the metaphor spiritually would be the kingdom, and more specifically would be the church for us. So if we want to meet our spiritual purpose and the reasons that God created us, we need to see fruit. So what's fruit? Fruit is a reproduction of what is coming, what's within us, the seed that God's put in us. And the purpose says that God created for us. That's the seed. That's what the seed represents. So obviously, seed is used. Guess where? Think about where seed might be used in the Bible continuously. Well, in Jesus' parables. Why? Because Jesus understood the principles. So if you're wrestling with a lot of what we said, Jesus actually understood the principles of what we've actually outlaid, particularly in relation to the Hebrew language. So he's talking about seed because he understands that. And this is what all these parables actually mean. We don't really give them much meaning. And I've always been confused why. I've always been confused actually why I've never heard a teaching on the meaning of any of Jesus' parables, collectively speaking, because we don't understand them. Because they have the same processes that we talked about. So we get the same sort of meaning that we're getting out of this story as we would from Jesus' parable. But if we skip that, but that's important. So to kind of recap, spiritually speaking, we need fruit, and we need fruit in the church, we need fruit in the kingdom. That's salvation, that's brightness from our situation. So we firstly need to give our lives to Jesus to fulfill our purpose, to be part of the kingdom. And that's salvation. So the two parts of that process are the same meaning. We get salvation, but we also get brightness. And the third thing we get also is reproduction of our seed. That doesn't say it in the storyline, but the storyline, that's what it's saying. Yeah, Tamar giving birth to kids. But before that can happen, we need a breakthrough. So this is really important. It's a spiritual principle. If you want salvation or brightness, you need breakthrough before. So in this context, Tamar needs a breakthrough, and that's how she gets her breakthrough. Again, you can think about how she did it. And it's not saying that how she did it was particularly righteous. It was particularly not righteous. But from a higher perspective, she got her breakthrough. She fulfilled her purpose. And again, it shows the way God's thinking is bigger than ours. And it's not black and white as well. We said that already, but it's worth re-highlighting. So if you take all of what we said and you take this third video where we're talking about breakthrough and salvation or brightness, and we put it in the context of you and some of the things you think you're fighting. Now, they may well be male leadership in the church or just men in general. That's a particular context. I think it's the storyline's highlighting that context. That's the context that God chose to give the story. He could have chosen something else. I could have used another story to highlight that. But he chose this, and there's reasoning and meaning to that. So that's a prime, but it might not necessarily be so. We're going to hold that idea for that video and look, okay, well, let's settle this role, men and women in the church, biblically. Look at the problems that women face with men in the church, particularly leadership in the church, holding them back, and let's kind of go through what the Bible says, and again we can have a disagreement about that. But think of anything that holds you back. So I want you to actually do that. This is a good thing for your lives, and particularly in the context of your lives, your prayer lives, and your relationship with God, which is what I call your prayer life. Your prayer life is, it's not just your relationship with God, but the purpose of prayer is to build your relationship with God and make it stronger and better, and to align your will with His. But you need a breakthrough, and you get that breakthrough, guess what? Not just by prayer, but that's primarily one of the key ways we get breakthrough. We get it for other ways. So other ways would be, I haven't really thought of this, to be honest. So I'm saying this off the top of my head. But certainly prayer, aligning ourselves to the will of God and praying. But primarily I think what it's actually teaching us before we actually understand what it is that could get us breakthrough is that we need breakthrough. That something needs to change. So think about what needs to change for you and how you go about that. Now, actually, I would question whether, both in your life and in my life, whether the things that need to change to see salvation, and before salvation seeing that breakthrough, are related to other people or actually related to ourselves. So I always say a lot of things, but in the context of what we're talking about, I would say the thing that I say is about control and what we actually have control of. We only have control of what's inside, not what's outside, and that's what we need to worry about. So in that context, the biggest breakthrough that you can have, or I can have, is the change that's made within ourselves, not outside. Now, you might need something else to change. You might need someone else to change. You know, I need something else to change, some of your circumstances. But you've got no control over that. So who's got the control? Well, God's got the control. So give it to Him. But we need to primarily work out what's within us that we need to change, because that's what we control, and not just ask God to make changes for us without making changes for ourselves. Yeah? And again, like Judah, we need to make a sacrifice. And we need to realise where we're obligated to God to make a change, and in other areas we're obligated to God, and not just worry about ourselves, because that's selfish. And really what we're saying about the guys is they're just selfish. Their intention is what they want or what they don't want. That's what's controlling them. So let go of you controlling yourself and work out what it is in your breakthrough where you're obligated to God, and do it. Or even where God's asking you to be obligated to other people. So if you've got a particular problem, this is a common thing. How do things happen in church? Well, one person it's about relationships. One person has a problem with another person. Well, you can't control that other person. You can only control you. So you fix you, don't worry about fixing other people, and God will take care of the rest. And that's true. I mean, not wanting to get into it, but I've faced some stuff in my life from when I was 12, and some really hard things. I mean, in the context of that, thank God I've not actually been sexually abused. Um, I've not had to face that breakthrough. But I've been abused in other ways. And I've been abused by people continuously since the age of 11, 12 really. Particularly mentally and even spiritually so. Had to face things I haven't had to face. But I've had to face stuff, so I think how I had breakthrough with some of those things without getting into details. Getting into details without naming names. It seems people like being horrible to me, and something I think was highlighted to me by God a very long time ago when I was like 19 or 20 is not only did it seem like people like to control or manipulate me, but that would be continually something I would face in my life and have to really have a breakthrough about. And I think the breakthrough really is to be in charge of me and not worry about what other people are doing and let God take care of the rest. And actually, not just what I found as this control and manipulation has continually happened, it's not very nice and it's horrible. Spiritually, it's really, really horrible sometimes, some of the things I've had to put up with. But you get through them and you come out the fruit of that by giving it to God and letting Him deal with that and being in charge of your own things has kind of really helped me grow, I think, actually. So it's the process, that point of the process isn't nice. And I guess what else I'm saying is in a process you only are in the moment of that process. You don't see the rest of the process. So you don't know what else is going to happen. You potentially can't see it improving. But things will get better. Things will change because life's about everything changing. Nothing stays stagnant. And things will change. And one day you will see brightness and breakthrough. And it's the weird thing actually doing that, letting God take control and just doing the best that you can do with the things that you have and you've got and changing you. God takes that and spins it around. And I think the final result of fruit is I don't know. I mean, how honest should I be? I think for me personally, I'm a very fragile person. But knowing my own fragility and giving it back to God, God kind of takes care of that for me on my behalf. So I've never actually fallen completely to pieces. It's very easy, I think, for me as a character to be broken about stuff sometimes. Just one of those people that naturally is empathetic and feels things quite deeply, and therefore it's easy to get broken. I think I've matured as a person, that's the other thing. I think it's learnt me how to deal with those properly, but firstly how to be more resilient, not to be in the moment as part of that, but generally just to be more resilient. I think it's what I've been through has done two things. On the inside it's made me softer, but it's given me tough skin. Actually, without some of those experiences I wouldn't be who I would. And it's hard sometimes. Sometimes you just got to give it to God and say, God, I am broken. Someone's broken me. I have to learn to forgive them and learn how to deal with not just the situation, but the repercussions and the fruit of the situation. So it's the same as for something evil as is good. You get evil fruit from evil DNA or evil seeds, and you get good from good. So it's the reason why control, gossiping, manipulation, lying is so evil, really, from my perspective, because it's just a seed. You don't know what the fruit is, and the fruit is pretty bad sometimes. It's just letting God deal with the judgment bit. I think what I've learned is, in terms of particularly judgment, that being judgmental is a very sucking experience in my life. It takes a lot of energy to be like that. So why be like that in the first place? But anyway, that's just me and my experience. I wasn't planning to say that, but there you go. So before you get that brightness, this is the principle. You need a breakthrough. So think about how you break out your situations and your experiences and what you're having to deal with, and how you need to change as well to have that breakthrough. I mean, fundamentally, although what Tamar did was sin, she did something. So work out what you need to do, what you need to change, because you can't do the same thing and expect the same result. And it may be looking at something differently. It may be letting something go, or letting a person go, letting that relationship fall apart. No matter how bad it is, if you give it to God and let God take control of it, you'll be okay. Whether it's how hard or difficult it is, if you give it to God, it's always okay. That's my underlying experience. So not only take something from this second principle, this what is the fruit of the seed principle, so to speak, but like you can apply it instantly to your life. So take the first principle about judgment. Really, it's about how religious you are. Let's be black and white about this. It's like, it's offensive because you're taking a religious point of view and a religious mindset, which gives a religious thinking and saying this is, you're making it black and white, this is right and wrong, and actually it's not that black and white, there are other things. But see it through God's eyes. Anything we face, I think, it's always the same point, see it through God's eyes, and that will align your will with His. Actually, that's part of the breakthrough process. When we align ourselves with Him, we are in line with His intentions, with His eternity, not just our own experiences or our own selfish desires. Become aligned with His, but we become aligned with the whole of eternity, really, which is wow, if you think about it. So specifically, we're aligned with God's plans and purposes, and take that first point with the second point about breakthrough that we talked about. Actually, this is a big lesson. It's got so much to teach us. So that's the overview, okay, which is like going to be almost, it's going to be 2 hours. Let's have a look how long we've gone on for. Yeah, 2 hours 15 to just underline what's going on, to cover a few things, and to highlight the 2 basic points. So it's a long time, but I think this has been worthwhile. It's been worthwhile for me to be sat here doing this, and we'll continue our journey. So I don't know what I plan to do next. The next video, the top 2 would be the seed process and the Shem thing. So I think in my mind the seed process is winning because it's so important to everything else. So to just dive, actually no, that's not the case. Off the top of my head, we're just gonna draw everything back together and do a review video. So like I said, review these videos if you found them helpful, to kind of regurgitate them. So it's the same with anything in life. If you regurgitate something good, you'll get more good out of it. If you regurgitate something bad, you'll get more bad out of it. It's the same process, believe it or not. So if this has been good, or anything particular you've drawn stuff out of, go for it again, listen to it again, and we'll do the review, and then we'll do the brightness, and we'll do the Shem. Okay, so I will see you, which I won't do, but I'll see you in the next video. Thank you for listening. Bye.